My name is Judith, and I'm 32. The dining room was a battlefield silverware clinking louder than my heartbeat. My father Harold laughed, his voice sharp as broken glass, calling my job pointless, a failure's work. I gripped my fork, the metal biting my palm, swallowing the sting. My phone lit up its screen, a lifeline. "Commander Anna, you're needed." The room froze. Every eye locked on me, their breaths held. Harold's smirk faded, his glass trembling in his hand. "What's your secret moment that changed everything?" Share where you're watching from, hit like and subscribe to see how my world turned upside down. I pushed the door open to my childhood home, the creak of hinges like a sigh from the past. At 32, I shouldn't have felt my stomach knot, but it did, tight as the laces on my worn boots. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and tension, the table set for 6 under a flickering bulb that buzzed faintly. My badge tucked in my purse felt heavier than the laptop bag slung over my shoulder. I'd just come off a 12-hour shift, my eyes stinging from screens and fluorescent lights. But I forced a smile, tight and thin. Harold sat at the head, his whiskey glass sweating onto the tablecloth, leaving a ring like a silent accusation. He barely looked up, just grunted, "Late again," his voice rough as gravel. My mother Eileen bustled in with a platter, her apron stained with grease, her smile tight, as if holding back words she'd never say. She didn't meet my eyes, just murmured about the food getting cold, her hands fluttering like nervous birds. Marvin, my older brother, leaned back, his mechanic's hands folded, grease stains faint under his nails, a smirk playing on his lips. Beverly, his wife, whispered something to him, her eyes flicking to me with that glint of judgment, her earrings catching the light like tiny warnings. Only Kathy, my younger cousin, lit up her college sweatshirt, a splash of color against the faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. "Judith, how's work?" she asked, her voice eager, her pen tapping her notebook. I slid into my seat, the chair wobbling its uneven legs, a reminder of this house's imperfections. "It's good," I said, keeping it vague. My job, classified projects, encrypted systems, a military contract that kept me awake, wasn't for this table. I mentioned leading a project, hoping it sounded normal. "Just finished something big," I added, my voice quieter than I meant, barely audible over the clink of glasses. Marvin snorted, cutting into his chicken, the knife scraping the plate. "What, typing emails all day?" Beverly laughed, a sharp sound that made my fork pause mid-air. "Yeah, must be nice sitting at a desk, not breaking a sweat," she said, her tone dripping with something I couldn't name, envy maybe, or just habit. I glanced at the wall where a framed photo caught my eye. Me at 10 in a school play, grinning in a cardboard crown, my hair in uneven braids. The one time I remember Harold clapping his hands loud and proud, his smile wide under the auditorium lights. Now he just sipped his whiskey, his eyes on his plate, the lines on his face deeper in the dim glow. "Kathy's got the right idea staying in school," Harold said, his voice gravelly, cutting through the hum of the room. "Not like some wasting their time on fancy degrees for nothing." My chest tightened, the air suddenly too thick, the bulbs buzz louder in my ears. I'd heard this before, his lectures about my useless computer science degree, how I should have stayed in town, worked a real job like Marvin at the garage. I looked at Eileen, hoping for a glance, a nod, anything to anchor me. She just pushed potatoes around her plate, her lips pressed thin, her fingers twitching. Kathy frowned, her fork hovering, her notebook forgotten. "Judith's doing great, Uncle Harold. She's like super smart." Her voice was small but fierce, and for a second, I wanted to hug her, to hold on to her belief in me. Harold waved her off his hand, heavy, dismissive. "Smart doesn't pay the bills unless you're fixing cars or pouring steel. She's just pushing papers, kid." My fingers curled around my napkin, the fabric soft and worn, fraying at the edges. I wanted to tell him about the systems I'd saved, the lives tied to my work, but the words stuck lodged like stones in my throat. Marvin leaned forward, his smirk growing, his eyes glinting under the light. "You know, Bev heard from someone at the garage you're barely scraping by. That true?" His voice was casual, but it cut deep like a blade slipping under skin. I forced another smile, my jaw tight, my teeth aching. "I'm fine, Marvin. Thanks for worrying." Beverly raised an eyebrow, her voice syrupy. her nails tapping the table. "Oh, we're not worried. Just wondering why you're still at that desk when you could have stayed here, had a real life." My fork scraped the plate louder than I meant, the sound jarring in the quiet. I saw that photo again, my younger self staring back, waiting for applause that never came. Kathy's eyes met mine wide and searching, her pen still in her hand. I looked away, the table feeling smaller, the walls closer, the air thick with expectations I'd never meet. My phone buried in my purse felt like the only lifeline I had left, its weight a quiet promise I didn't yet know I'd need. I took a sip of water, the glass cool against my palm, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The dining room felt like a stage, every word, a line in a play I hadn't signed up for. The bulb flickered, casting shadows that danced on the walls, making the room feel unsteady. I turned to Kathy, hoping to shift the focus to find some air in this stifling space. "So college is going well?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant, barely carrying over the clatter of plates. She nodded, her eyes bright, her notebook open to a page of scribbled equations. "Yeah, I'm thinking about computer science like you." Her words warmed me, a flicker of pride cutting through the dim room like a candle in a draft. But before I could respond, Harold set his glass down hard, the thud sharp like a gavel falling. "Computer science," he said, his voice low, mocking his breath, sharp with whiskey. "That's what you call sitting in a cubicle pretending to matter." My breath caught the room tilting slightly, the shadows stretching longer. Eileen froze her fork halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting to Harold but saying nothing, her silence a weight of its own. Marvin chuckled, leaning back, his chair creaking. "She's probably just playing games on her laptop all day," he said, his tone light but cutting like a jab meant to bruise. I pressed my lips together, my fingers tightening on the glass, its chill grounding me. I wanted to tell them about the late nights, the encrypted files, the decisions that kept me awake, wondering if I'd made the right call. But this table wasn't a place for truth. It was a place for judgment, for old wounds dressed up as conversation. Beverly tilted her head, her smile thin, her earrings glinting like accusations. "You know, I heard from Mrs. Carter at the market that you're still renting that tiny apartment. Must be tough, all that schooling and no big house to show for it." Her words landed like a slap, casual but deliberate, each one a spark in the dry tinder of my patience. I glanced at Kathy, whose face flushed red, her hands clenched under the table, her notebook creased where she gripped it. "That's not fair," she said, her voice trembling but bold. "Judith's doing important stuff." Harold snorted, his eyes narrowing, the lines on his face sharper in the flickering light. "Important. She's wasting her life on screens while real people work with their hands. Always thought she was better than us." My throat tightened, a familiar ache spreading through my chest like a bruise I'd carried too long. I remembered the summer I left for college. Harold standing in the driveway, his arms crossed, saying I'd come crawling back when I failed. I hadn't, but every visit felt like proof he was right. His words a mirror I couldn't escape. Eileen reached for the breadbasket, her hands shaking slightly, her fingers brushing the woven handle. "Let's talk about something else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, lost in the hum of the bulb. But Harold leaned forward, his gaze heavy on me, his glass empty now. "No, let's talk about this. You think you're some hotshot, but you're just a girl who forgot where she came from." My heart pounded, each word carving deeper like a chisel on stone. I set the glass down, the clink too loud in the silence, the water trembling inside. Kathy reached for my hand under the table, her fingers warm and steady, but I pulled away, afraid I'd break if I let her hold on. I stood my chair, scraping the floor, the sound raw like a wound opening. I excused myself to the kitchen, my steps uneven, the linoleum cold under my feet, the sink piled with dishes from Eileen's frantic cooking. The faucet dripped a steady rhythm that matched my pulse. I turned it on, letting the water run over my hands, its chill a brief escape from the voices in my head, Harold's, Marvin's, even my own whispering, I wasn't enough. Eileen slipped in behind me, her apron still tied her hair, escaping its bun. "He's just tired," she said, her voice soft, pleading, her hands twisting the hem of her apron. But I saw the truth in her eyes. The same resignation I'd seen for years, a shadow of the mother who'd once braided my hair and promised I'd shine. I dried my hands on a faded towel, my phone buzzing in my purse, a faint lifeline to a world where I wasn't a failure. "I'm fine, Mom." I lied, my voice steady but hollow, my reflection in the kitchen window pale and unfamiliar. I walked back to the table, the drip of the faucet still echoing, knowing it would only get worse. The rain outside grew louder, hammering the roof like it wanted to break through, each drop a drumbeat against my nerves. I stared at my plate, the food untouched, my hands trembling under the table, hidden from their stares. Harold's voice cut through the silence again, sharper now, like he sensed my weakness, his whiskey glass glinting in the dim light. "You remember when you were 16, Judith? That science fair you were so proud of." His lips curled, not quite a smile, his voice heavy with mockery. "I told you it was a waste of time, but you went anyway. And what did you get? A ribbon for showing up." My breath hitched, the memory flooding back, not the ribbon, but the empty bleachers where I'd waited for him. My project propped on a folding table, its lights blinking uselessly. I'd stood there clutching my poster, scanning the crowd for his face, my dress itching against my skin. He'd been at Marvin's football game, cheering loud enough for the whole town to hear his voice carrying over the field. The sting of that day burned fresh, my ribs tight with it, the air in the room too heavy to breathe. Beverly leaned in, her voice syrupy like she was sharing a secret at a church social. "You always had to be the special one, didn't you? Acting like you were above us all." Her words landed heavy, each one a stone piling on my chest, her smile sharp as the edge of a blade. I wanted to snap back, to tell her about the systems I'd built, the lives my work touched, but my tongue felt glued, my voice lost in the storm outside. Marvin shook his head, his voice low, his fingers tapping the table. "She left us high and dry, Dad. Went off to play genius while I stayed to keep the garage running." His eyes flicked to me, hard and accusing, like I'd stolen something from him, maybe the approval he wore like a badge. I saw the years of resentment there, the way he'd carried Harold's pride, while I carried his scorn, a weight I'd never asked for. Eileen reached for the salt, her movements jerky, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, its faded flowers a map of forgotten dinners. "Maybe we should talk about the weather," she said, her voice thin, barely audible over the storm's roar. But Harold wasn't done. He leaned forward, his breath sharp with whiskey, his shirt creased from sitting too long. "You think you're better than this family, Judith. You think your little computer games make you somebody. You're nothing without us." My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the weight of his words, each one a hammer on the cracks in my heart. I remembered the nights I'd called home from college, my dorm room lit by a single lamp, hoping for a kind word, only to hear him say I'd fail. Every achievement I'd clawed for, every late night, every solved problem felt erased, reduced to nothing in this room, its walls closing in like a trap. Kathy's voice broke through, small but fierce, her notebook clenched in her hands. "You don't know her, Uncle Harold. You don't know what she does." Her eyes were wet, her hands balled into fists, her voice shaking but unyielding. Harold's gaze snapped to her, cold and unyielding, his jaw tight. "Stay out of this, Kathy. You don't know what real work is either." My phone buzzed again, louder, insistent, its vibration rattling the table. I couldn't move my hands, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The room felt like it was closing in the air, too thick to breathe the storm outside, a mirror to the chaos inside me. Harold's stare bore into me, waiting for me to break, and for the first time I wasn't sure I could hold myself together. My fingers twitched, itching to reach for the phone, for the world where I was more than this. The rain outside roared, a relentless curtain against the windows, but inside the silence was heavier, thick as fog. My phone buzzed again, sharp and unyielding, its screen glowing on the table like a beacon in the dark. Harold's words still hung in the air, his voice a blade. "You're nothing without us." My chest burned, my fingers numb from gripping the edge of my chair, the wood rough under my palms. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floorboards, their worn grain a map of my failures. But the phone's light demanded attention, its glow cutting through the haze. I reached for it, my hand trembling, the weight of every eye in the room pressing on me like a physical force. The screen read, Urgent, Leroy. My heart stuttered, a jolt of adrenaline slicing through the fog. I knew what this meant. A crisis only I could handle, a call from a world where I wasn't nothing. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button, my breath shallow, knowing this moment would crack my life in two. I pressed it, holding the phone to my ear, its plastic cool against my skin. Leroy's voice came through, crisp and urgent, cutting through the fog of the dining room like a lifeline. Commander Anna, we've got a critical systems breach. You're needed now. The words hit like a shockwave, my codename echoing in my skull. Commander Anna, a secret I'd guarded for years, now exposed in this cramped, judgmental space, its peeling wallpaper a witness to my unraveling. The room froze, the air still as if time had stopped. Marvin's fork clattered to his plate, the sound sharp, jarring against the silence. Beverly's mouth fell open, her napkin slipping to the floor, a soft thud on the wood. Eileen's eyes widened, her hand clutching her glass, her knuckles pale. Kathy stared, her lips parting in awe, her notebook forgotten. And Harold, his face drained of color, his whiskey glass still in hand, his smirk gone like it had never existed, replaced by a blankness I'd never seen. I stood my chair, scraping the wood floor, the sound louder than the storm outside, raw and final. My voice, when it came, was steadier than I felt, a quiet defiance I hadn't known I had. I'm on my way, I said into the phone, my eyes locked on Harold's, searching for something, anger, pride, anything. His gaze faltered, flickering to the table, then back to me, his hands trembling slightly. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and something new, power maybe, or defiance, like a spark catching in dry grass. I grabbed my purse, the badge inside it, heavy with the truth I'd hidden, its weight a reminder of the oaths I'd sworn. Leroy's voice crackled again, urgent, giving me coordinates I couldn't repeat. Hear each word pulling me away from this room. I moved toward the door, my legs steady, despite the chaos in my chest, the storm outside calling me forward. Kathy's voice broke the silence, soft but clear like a bell in the fog. Commander Anna, she whispered, testing the words, her eyes wide with wonder. Marvin blinked, his voice hoarse, his chair creaking as he shifted. What the hell does that mean? Beverly's eyes darted between me and Harold. Her usual confidence shaken, her hands twisting her napkin. Is this some kind of joke? She stammered, her voice thin. Harold's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around his glass, his face a mask of shock. What's going on, Judith? He demanded, his voice low, almost a growl but cracked with uncertainty. I paused at the door, rain pelting the porch beyond, the cold air seeping through the frame. I wanted to scream, to tell them about the years of silence, the weight of secrets I'd carried, to protect them, to protect myself from their judgment. But I didn't. I just looked at him, my father, the man who'd called me nothing, and said, "You wouldn't understand." The words hung there, sharp and final, cutting through the air as I stepped into the storm, the rain swallowing me whole. I stepped onto the porch, rain soaking my hair, my coat heavy against my shoulders, clinging to my skin like a second weight. The cold bit my face, but it couldn't match the chill inside me, a hollow ache that had grown with every word thrown at me. Behind me, the door creaked open and footsteps followed my family, spilling out, their silhouettes blurred by the downpour, their shadows long and jagged. Harold's voice boomed louder than the storm, raw with something I couldn't name. You don't walk away from me, Judith. Explain yourself. His demand was desperate, like I'd stolen something he couldn't define, his cap dripping water onto his shoulders. I turned, my shoes slipping on the wet wood, my pulse hammering in my ears louder than the rain. Marvin stood beside him, arms crossed, his face a mix of confusion and betrayal, his jacket soaked through. What's this commander nonsense? He snapped, his voice sharp but unsteady. Beverly hovered, her eyes wide, clutching her sweater, its wool dark with rain. You're not some spy, are you? She said, half laughing, half accusing, her voice trembling. Eileen's voice was soft, trembling, barely carrying over the storm. Judith, please just tell us. Only Kathy stayed quiet, her gaze steady through the rain, like she saw me, really saw me for the first time. My phone vibrated again, Leroy's voice urgent in my earpiece, a tether to the world I knew. Anna, we're losing time. You need to move. I pressed the earpiece closer, my breath shallow, torn between the crisis waiting and the one unfolding here. the rain blurring their faces. Harold took a step forward, rain dripping from his cap, his face twisted not with anger but with something raw or fear maybe, or loss. "You think you can just leave us in the dark, play hero, while we're nothing to you." His words sliced deeper than any before, stripping away the years I'd spent proving myself to him, my hands shaking at my sides. I saw the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd once carried me on his shoulders through the fair, his laugh warm, then now staring at me like a stranger. My throat burned words I couldn't say, clawing at me about the classified missions, the sleepless nights coding under pressure, the lives I held in my hands, the mentor who'd seen my potential when no one else had. Beverly's voice cut through, shrill and biting her sweater, clinging to her arms. "She's always been secretive, Harold. Probably ashamed of whatever she's doing." My chest tightened, the air too thick to breathe, the rain cold against my neck. Marvin shook his head, his voice low, his boots heavy on the porch. "You left us behind, Judith. Now you're pulling this stunt." I wanted to scream that I'd never left them, that every choice was for them, to make them proud, to show I could be more than their doubts. But the truth was locked inside me, bound by oaths I couldn't break, sworn to a mentor who'd taught me to protect what mattered. Eileen reached out her hand, trembling in the rain, her fingers pale and fragile. "Sweetheart, just come back inside," she pleaded, her voice breaking, her eyes wet with more than rain. But I couldn't. Not now. My car was steps away, its headlights cutting through the storm, a lifeline to a world where I wasn't a failure, where I was needed. I took a step backward, rain streaming down my face, mixing with tears I hadn't let fall, my shoes sinking into the wet wood. Harold's eyes burned into me, his silence louder than his shouts, his face a map of lines I didn't recognize. The weight of their stares, their questions, their judgment pressed down heavier than the storm, heavier than the secrets I carried. My phone buzzed again, relentless, pulling me away, its vibration, a pulse against my hand. I turned, my heart splintering, knowing I was leaving more than the porch behind. Every step felt like a fracture, the distance between us growing, my world splitting in two with no way to bridge it, the rain washing away the girl I'd been. I stumbled into my car, rain soaking my clothes, the door slamming shut with a thud that echoed in my chest. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, the leather worn under my palms, as Harold's words echoed in my head. "You're nothing without us." The engine roared to life, headlights slicing through the storm, casting jagged shadows on the road. I fumbled for my earpiece, its wire tangled from my rush, and Leroy's voice crackled through, steady but urgent, a lifeline pulling me back to myself. "Anna, we're tracking a cyber attack on the eastern grid. You're our lead. ETA 10 minutes. My breath steadied, the weight of his trust grounding me like a hand on my shoulder. I wasn't Judith, the failure here. I was Commander Anna, needed, capable, the woman my mentor Clara, not her real name, had seen in me when I was just a scared coder. I pulled onto the road, tires splashing through puddles, the town blurring past its familiar streets, now foreign in the rain. The wipers slapped rhythmically, clearing the windshield. But not my thoughts, the sound a metronome to my racing heart. I glanced at the passenger seat where my purse lay. The secure badge inside it, a silent reminder of who I'd become, its edges worn from years of carrying it in secret. Leroy's voice cut in again, sharp and focused. "Anna, we've got breaches in 3 sectors. You're calling the shots." I nodded, though he couldn't see, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "Lock down the secondary servers. I'm almost there." My foot pressed harder on the gas, the speed a rebellion against the weight of the dinner table, against the years of shrinking myself to fit their expectations. I passed the old church, its steeple looming in the rain, where I'd once prayed for Harold's approval, my knees cold on the pews. That girl felt so far away now, replaced by someone who could save systems, maybe even live, someone Clara had trained to stand tall. But the sting of Harold's voice lingered, a shadow. I couldn't outrun a whisper that I wasn't enough. A checkpoint loomed ahead, its floodlights harsh against the night, cutting through the rain like a warning. 2 guards in slickers waved me through, one saluting sharply, his voice clear despite the storm. "Commander Anna," he said, his tone clipped, respectful, his face half hidden under his hood. My heart surged, a spark of pride cutting through the ache, a reminder of the trust I'd earned. I nodded back, my wet hair clinging to my face, the rain cold on my scalp, and sped past the road, narrowing as pines closed in. The facility wasn't far now, a gray building hidden behind trees, unassuming but alive with urgency, its hum, a call I couldn't ignore. I thought of Kathy's whisper, Commander Anna, and the awe in her eyes, the way she'd looked at me like I was someone new. She'd seen me, really seen me, when no one else had, her faith a mirror to Clara's belief in me years ago. I gripped the wheel tighter, my resolve hardening, my fingers steady despite the cold. This wasn't just about the breach. It was about proving I was more than the nothing Harold claimed, more than the girl who'd left this town. Leroy's voice buzzed again, relaying data points, his tone calm, but pressing a reminder of the stakes. My mind flickered to the family I'd left on the porch, their faces blurred by rain, Harold's rage, Eileen's pleading eyes, Marvin's betrayal. I'd walked away not because I wanted to, but because I had to, because the world needed me, even if they didn't. My car skidded slightly on a turn, the rain relentless, but I straightened it, my focus sharpening the road ahead, a path I'd chosen. I was done shrinking, done letting their words define me. The facility's gates appeared steel and unyielding, a threshold to a world where I mattered, where Clara's lessons echoed in every decision. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding with purpose, ready to step into the role I'd fought so hard to earn, the rain a rhythm to my resolve. The facility doors slid open, the hum of servers greeting me like a heartbeat steady and alive. I stepped inside, rain dripping from my coat onto the polished floor, leaving dark spots that glistened under the fluorescent lights. The control room buzzed with urgency screens flickering with red alerts, their glow casting shadows on my team's faces. Leroy met my eyes, his nod sharp, trusting his glasses reflecting the screens. "Anna, you're up," he said, gesturing to the central console, its surface cool under my fingers. My team faces taut looked to me, their confidence a lifeline, their eyes steady despite the chaos. I took my place, fingers flying across the keyboard, isolating the breach, each keystroke a step away from the dinner table's weight. Data streams filled the screens, a language I spoke fluently, one Harold could never understand, one Clara had taught me to master. My heart steadied, the chaos of that night fading as I issued commands, my voice calm, certain. Reroute the tertiary grid, I said, my words clear-cutting through the hum of the room. The team moved in sync, their trust in me, a weight I carried willingly, a trust I'd earned through years of proving myself. I flashed to the moment I'd earned this role, nights spent decoding threats in a cramped office, Clara's voice steady over my shoulder telling me I could do this. Harold's voice calling me nothing tried to creep in, but I pushed it out, my fingers moving faster. I wasn't that girl anymore, waiting for his nod, hoping for a scrap of pride. I typed faster, rerouting systems, my mind sharp, despite the ache in my chest, the memory of Clara's faith stronger than Harold's doubt. Leroy leaned in, his voice low, his breath warm in the cold room. "You're saving us, Anna." Like always. His words hit deep, a validation I'd never gotten at home, a reminder of the team that saw me clearly. I glanced at the monitor, my codename glowing in bold letters, Commander Anna. It wasn't just a title. It was armor forged through years of doubt and grit, polished by Clara's belief in me. My phone pinged, a text from Kathy. "They're freaking out. I'm proud of you." I paused, my fingers hovering over the keys, her words a tether pulling me back to the family I'd left in the rain. I typed a quick reply. "Keep them calm, please," my trust in her, a small rebellion against the silence I'd grown up with, a nod to the cousin who dared to dream like me. The breach was stabilizing, my team's movements precise under my lead, their hands steady on their consoles. But a part of me knew this wasn't the end. I'd have to face them again, Harold's glare, Eileen's quiet hope, Marvin's resentment. The thought tightened my throat, but I straightened, focusing on the screen, the data, a puzzle I could solve. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing who I'd be choosing, the woman Clara had seen, the one who could lead. The final command locked the system, the alerts fading to green, the screens a quiet victory. My team exhaled, a ripple of relief passing through their shoulders, easing. Leroy clapped my shoulder, his grin wide, his hand warm through my damp coat. Knew you'd pull it off. I nodded, my lips tight, the weight of the night settling back in heavier now with what lay ahead. I stepped away from the console, my boots echoing in the quiet, the sound sharp against the hum of servers. In my pocket, my badge pressed against my hip, a reminder of the line I'd crossed, the world I'd claimed. I looked out at the rain-streaked window, my reflection faint but steady, my eyes clearer than they'd been in years. I wasn't just Judith anymore. I was Anna. And for the first time, I felt the strength of that name in my bones, a strength I'd carry back to the family waiting for me. I pulled into the driveway at dawn, the sky a bruised purple, the rain finally gone, leaving a quiet that felt almost sacred. My hands still trembled from the night's work, my badge heavy in my pocket, its edges pressing through the fabric. The house loomed quiet, its windows dark, but I knew they were awake, waiting, their silhouettes lingering in my mind. I stepped inside, my boots soft on the rug, the air smelling of coffee and old wood. I found them in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow, softening the edges of their faces. Harold sat stiff in his armchair, his face unreadable, hands folded tight, his knuckles pale. Eileen stood by the couch, her apron gone, her eyes red-rimmed but steady, her hair loose for once. Marvin slouched against the wall, his jaw set, his work boots scuffed from pacing. Beverly sat rigid, her hands clasped her nails, unpainted, a rare vulnerability. Kathy perched on the couch's edge, her gaze bright but nervous, her notebook clutched like a shield. I set my purse down, the badge inside it, thudding softly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Harold's eyes flicked to it, then to me, his gaze searching. "What was that stunt?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, but edged with something new, uncertainty maybe, or a crack in his armor. I took a breath, my throat dry from hours of commands and rain, my skin still cold. "It wasn't a stunt," I said, my voice quieter than I meant, each word a step into unknown territory. "I lead a classified tech unit. That's my job." The words felt strange, exposed, like peeling back a bandage to show a wound I'd hidden for years. Marvin's head snapped up, his eyes, narrowing, his hands fidgeting in his pockets. "You're saying you're some kind of spy?" His tone was sharp, skeptical, but his voice shook, betraying his unease, his world shifting under him. Beverly's lips parted, her voice thin, almost fragile. "You never told us anything like that." Her accusation stung, but it was softer than before, like she wasn't sure where to stand, her hands still in her lap. Eileen stepped closer, her hands twisting together, her sweater loose at the cuffs. "Judith, I always knew you were doing something big," she said, her voice trembling with pride, but laced with hurt, her eyes searching mine. I looked at her, my chest aching, wishing I could tell her I'd wanted to share, that I'd tried. But Harold's judgment had always stopped me. Kathy's voice broke in, soft but fierce, her notebook open to a blank page. "She's a hero, Aunt Eileen. You heard it, Commander Anna." Her words hung there, a lifeline, a spark in the dim room, but they couldn't bridge the gap between us, not yet. Harold leaned forward, his eyes hard, but flickering, like he was seeing me for the first time, his hands gripping the armrests. "So you're what? Running some secret operation while we're here, thinking you're nothing?" His voice cracked, not with anger but with something raw, wounded. A father grappling with a daughter he didn't know. I met his gaze, my heart pounding, my fingers brushing the badge in my pocket, its edges sharp, grounding. I wanted to tell them everything, the stakes, the sleepless nights, the mentor who'd shaped me, the lives I'd protected, but the words wouldn't come, locked behind years of silence. The room felt frozen, their stares heavy, waiting for me to explain a life I'd kept hidden, to shield them, to shield myself. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows, and I stood there, caught between worlds, the weight of truth heavier than I'd expected. The living room felt smaller, the air stale despite the open window, its curtains swaying slightly in the morning breeze. I stood there, my wet coat dripping onto the rug, the badge in my pocket, a silent anchor, its weight a reminder of the line I'd crossed. Harold's question lingered, his eyes searching mine, no longer sharp but unsteady, like he was grappling with a stranger in his daughter's skin. Marvin shifted his boots, scuffing the floor, the sound rough in the quiet. "You let us think you were nobody," he said, not angry but wounded, like I'd betrayed him by being more, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Beverly's gaze dropped to her hands, her fingers twisting a ring. Her usual sharpness dulled her face softer in the dawn light. Eileen's eyes were wet, her lips trembling as she whispered, "I should have asked more." Her words cut soft but heavy, a confession of years spent looking away, her hands clutching her sweater. I opened my mouth, but my voice caught raw from the night, my throat tight from hours of commands. "I didn't know how to tell you," I said, each word deliberate, like stepping on glass, careful not to shatter. Every time I tried, it felt like I was shouting into a void. Harold flinched just barely, his hands tightening on the armrests, his face etched with lines I hadn't noticed before. I saw the man who'd dismissed my dreams, who'd laughed at my ambition, now silent, his shoulders slouched, his eyes searching for something he'd lost. Kathy moved closer, her hand brushing mine, her touch warm, her voice soft. "You don't have to explain to them," she said, her loyalty a quiet fire, her notebook still in her hand. But I did. I needed them to see the weight I'd carried, the secrets I'd kept, to protect them from my world, to protect myself from their judgment. Harold cleared his throat, his voice rough, quieter than I'd ever heard, almost a whisper. "I thought you were running from us," he said, his eyes on the floor, his hands still. "Thought you were ashamed of where you came from." My chest tightened, a mix of pity and frustration, the air heavy with his confession. I saw his life, decades in the factory, dreams he'd buried under grease and steel, pride he'd poured into Marvin instead of me, a choice I'd never understood. "I wasn't running," I said, my voice steady but cold, each word a stone I'd carried too long. "I was building something." Eileen reached for me, her fingers brushing my arm, her touch tentative, but I stepped back, the contact too much, too raw. Marvin's eyes flickered with something like regret, but he stayed silent, his hands still in his pockets, his shoulders tense. The room grew still, the weight of truth settling like dust, the lamp's glow softening the edges of their faces. I thought of the facility, the green screens, the team that called me Commander Anna, the mentor who'd seen my spark when I was just a coder with a dream. That world felt solid, real, while this one, my family, felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of years unspoken. Harold looked up, his face older, softer, but his silence said more than his words ever had, a quiet admission of his own failures. I turned away, my gaze falling on the window, the dawn light faint and gray casting long shadows on the rug. My heart felt hollow, not from anger, but from the quiet realization that I'd outgrown their version of me. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss, a fracture that might never heal. A week had passed, and I woke to soft morning light spilling through my apartment window, painting the walls in hues of gold, the kind of light that felt like a promise. At 32, I'd grown used to quiet mornings, but today felt different, lighter, like the air itself was giving me room to breathe, the city's hum, a gentle pulse outside. I sat on my couch, a mug of coffee warming my hands, its steam curling upward, the scent grounding me. The chaos of that dinner, the weight of Harold's words, felt distant, like a storm that had blown through, leaving only echoes. I pulled out my journal, its leather cover worn from years of late-night thoughts, its pages filled with doubts I'd carried too long. I flipped to a blank page, my pen hovering the ink, ready to spill truths I hadn't spoken aloud. I wrote about the call that night, the rush of being needed, the way Commander Anna felt more real than Judith ever had, the way my mentor's voice still echoed in my choices. My phone buzzed on the table, Kathy's name lighting up the screen, her text a spark in the quiet. I smiled, texting her to meet for coffee later, picturing her bright eyes, her notebook always close. Her faith in me, that fierce spark in her gaze, had been a lifeline when I'd walked into the rain, a reminder of who I could be. I thought of the facility, the screens I'd steadied, the team that looked to me, their trust a weight I'd learned to carry. Leroy had called yesterday, his voice warm through the line, steady as always. "Anna, there's a promotion on the table. You've earned it." His words settled in me, not as pride, but as a quiet truth, a confirmation of the path I'd forged. I'd spent so long chasing Harold's approval, measuring my worth by his gaze. But now sitting here, I saw it clearly. My value wasn't his to give, wasn't anyone's to define. I glanced at the journal, my handwriting uneven but sure, the ink dark against the page. I wrote about the girl who'd left this town carrying dreams too big for its borders, her backpack heavy with books and hope. She'd been scared, unsure, but she'd built something real, line by line, choice by choice. I traced a line from years ago, a note from my science fair days. "You are enough." I'd written it in a moment of defiance, a shield against doubt, a promise to myself when no one else believed. Now it felt like a vow I'd kept, a truth I'd lived into. My phone pinged again, a work email about the next project, its subject line urgent but familiar. I let it sit unopened for once, not needing to prove myself in every moment. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding, and let the silence wrap around me, soft as the morning light. The city hummed outside, a low pulse of life I'd grown to love, its rhythm a contrast to the stillness of my hometown. I thought of Kathy, her dreams of studying tech, her courage to speak up at that table, her own fight against the weight of family expectations. I wanted to tell her to hold on to that fire, to never let anyone dim it, to be the woman I'd learned to be. My pen moved again, scribbling a question. Who am I without their expectations? The answer wasn't clear, but it was mine to find a path I'd walk on my own terms. I set the journal down, my chest lighter, and looked out at the morning sky, its colors soft and steady, like a breath I hadn't taken in years, a moment of peace I'd earned. I met Kathy at the diner, the smell of pancakes and coffee wrapping around us like a warm blanket, the jukebox playing a soft tune in the corner. She slid into the booth across from me, her smile bright but cautious, her college backpack slung over one shoulder, its straps frayed from use. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft, like she was afraid to break something fragile, her hands fidgeting with a straw wrapper. I nodded, stirring my coffee. The spoon clinking gently against the mug, its sound a quiet rhythm. Getting there, I said, my voice steadier than I felt the words, carrying a truth I was still uncovering. We talked about her classes, her dreams of coding, her eyes lighting up as she described a project she'd started. I saw myself in her, hungry for a world bigger than this town, her ambition a mirror to my own, her courage a spark I wanted to protect. I told her to keep pushing, to never let anyone make her feel small, my voice firm but gentle, a promise I wished I'd heard at her age. My phone buzzed, Marvin of all people texting an apology, his words plain but heavy. Dinner soon. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the screen, the diner's hum fading around me. I didn't need his regret, but it stirred something in me, a crack in the wall. We'd built a glimpse of a brother I hadn't known in years. Eileen called later, her voice brighter than I'd heard in years, a new strength in her tone. "Your father's seeing someone," she said, meaning therapy, not romance. Her words careful but hopeful. "He's trying Judith." I pictured Harold in a therapist's office, his hands folded, his face tight, struggling to unpack decades of pride and regret. I didn't know if I believed in his change, but I wanted to, not for him, but for Eileen, for the mother who'd stayed quiet too long. I drove to their house that afternoon, the familiar road winding past fields now green with early summer, the air warm through my open window. Harold was in the garage, tinkering with an old radio, its wires spilling across his workbench. His movements slow, deliberate, like he was searching for something in the circuits. I stood in the doorway, holding a tech magazine I'd picked up on impulse, its cover bright with circuit patterns. "Thought you might like this," I said, setting it on his workbench, the paper crinkling softly. He glanced at it, then at me. His eyes softer, less guarded, the lines on his face less sharp in the sunlight. "Thanks," he said, his voice gruff, but not cold, a hint of curiosity in his tone. We sat on the porch steps, coffee mugs in hand. The silence between us, not heavy but careful, like we were learning each other again, stepping lightly on new ground. Eileen joined us, her smile tentative but real, her hands free of her apron for once. I looked out at the yard, the grass patchy but alive, its green a quiet promise of growth. I didn't need Harold's pride anymore, not the way I once did, not the way I'd craved it as a girl. I'd built my own line by line, choice by choice, through nights of doubt and days of triumph. The magazine lay between us, its glossy cover catching the light, a small bridge to a conversation we might have one day, a step toward something new. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and let the moment hold us fragile, but enough for now, a quiet I hadn't known I could find. A month later, I sat at another family dinner, the table set with the same chipped plates, but the air felt different, less heavy, like a window had been cracked open, letting in a breeze I hadn't noticed before. At 32, I'd stopped expecting miracles, but tonight I felt a quiet shift, a softening in the room's edges. Harold sat across from me, his hands steady, no whiskey glass in sight. His shirt pressed a rare effort. Eileen's laugh was softer, more present as she passed the green beans, her hands steady, her eyes brighter. Marvin and Beverly sat closer, their usual sharpness dulled, replaced by a cautious curiosity, their voices softer in the lamplight. Kathy, her hair pulled back, grinned at me, her notebook open to a page of coding notes, her pen moving with purpose. I wore the bracelet she'd made me, a thin silver band with Anna etched in tiny letters, a reminder of who I'd become, its weight light, but grounding. I shared a story from work. Not the classified parts, but the small victories like debugging a system before dawn, the quiet thrill of solving a problem no one else could. Harold listened, his fork paused, his eyes flickering with something new, interest maybe, or respect, his face softer in the glow. Sounds like a lot of responsibility, he said, his voice gruff, but not dismissive, a question hidden in his tone. I nodded, my chest warm, not from his words, but from the ease of speaking them, the freedom of not hiding. Marvin asked a question about servers, his tone genuine, his hands still for once, and Beverly nodded along, her usual smirk gone, her eyes curious. Eileen reached for my hand, her touch light but firm, her fingers warm. "You're doing good, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady like she'd found her own strength, a mother stepping out of the shadows. Kathy leaned forward, her eyes bright, her notebook filled with ideas. "I'm switching my major to computer science," she announced, her voice bold, unafraid. "You inspired me, Judith." My throat tightened, not with pain, but with something softer, pride maybe, or gratitude, a warmth that spread through me. I saw myself in her, the girl who'd once dreamed big in a town that felt too small, who'd fought for every step. I told her to keep pushing, to trust her instincts, my voice steady, a promise I meant. The table fell quiet, but it wasn't tense, just thoughtful, like we were all seeing each other anew, our shadows softer in the lamplight. I looked around, the glow casting gentle lines, and felt a stillness settle in me, like a river finding its course after a storm, steady and sure. I thought of the nights I'd spent doubting myself, measuring my worth by Harold's silence, my heart heavy with his words. Those nights felt far away now, not gone, but less sharp, like a scar that no longer ached, its edges smoothed by time. I didn't need their approval to stand tall. But sitting here sharing this meal, I realized I could choose to let them in, to share the woman I'd become. The bracelet glinted on my wrist, a quiet tether to both Anna and Judith, to the woman who'd fought to be seen and the one learning to forgive. I took a slow breath, the chatter around me fading, and felt the weight of the past loosen just enough to let me rest, to let me be. As the dinner plates emptied, the conversation softened, a hum of voices weaving around the table, the clink of forks, a gentle rhythm. I leaned back, my fingers tracing the edge of my napkin, its texture rough under my fingertips, feeling the weight of a moment I hadn't expected. Harold cleared his throat, his voice low but clear, carrying a new weight. "I'm trying to understand your world, Judith," he said, his eyes meeting mine, not with pride but with effort, like he was reaching across a chasm built by years of silence. I nodded, my lips tight, not trusting myself to speak, my heart steady but full. Marvin shared a story about a tough day at the garage, his tone open like he was letting me in for the first time, his hands gesturing freely. Beverly listened, her hands still no longer picking at flaws, her eyes softer in the warm light. Eileen hummed softly, clearing dishes, her movements lighter like she'd shed a weight of her own, her smile brighter than I'd seen in years. Kathy sketched a flowchart in her notebook, Her enthusiasm, a spark that lit the room, her pen moving with a purpose I recognized. I thought of the years I'd spent carrying their doubts, letting them shape the edges of my heart, each one a stone I'd carried too long. I'd fought to be Commander Anna to prove I was more than their words, but sitting here I saw something else, something clearer. I didn't need to win their approval to be whole to be enough. I'd built my strength in quiet moments. Code written at midnight. Choices made under pressure, trust earned from those who saw me clearly like Clara, who'd believed in me when I couldn't. Forgiving them wasn't about erasing the hurt. It was about choosing to carry less, about letting go of the weight I'd held for their sake. I looked at Harold, his face lined with years I hadn't understood, his hands worn from work, and felt a quiet compassion not for his sake but for mine. I was free to be both Judith and Anna, to hold my past and my power without apology, to stand in my truth. The meal ended with laughter, not loud, but real, a sound that felt like a beginning, like a door opening, just a crack. I stood to help Eileen with the dishes, our hands brushing, as we stacked plates. A silent understanding passing between us, her touch warm and steady. Kathy hugged me, her arms tight, whispering, "You're my hero," her voice a quiet fire that warmed me. I smiled, my heart full, knowing I'd given her something I'd once craved, a spark to carry forward. As we said goodnight, the stars outside were sharp against the dark, a map of possibilities I hadn't seen before, their light steady and clear. I drove home, the road quiet, my bracelet catching the dashboard light, its silver glinting like a promise. I was enough, not because they saw it, but because I did, because I'd chosen to be. What moment made you realize your worth wasn't tied to someone else's eyes? Share it below. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, give it a like, subscribe for more, and maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for sitting with me tonight, for listening to my journey. Here's to finding our own light wherever we are.